Imagine time travelling back to the age of 10. You're in the school playground, surrounded by your mates. Out of the blue, your friend, let's call him Joe, begins to claim that he is by far the strongest of the group. After all, he did carry all his mum's shopping bags from the car into the house at the weekend. You take offence to this, believing yourself to be far stronger than he. An argument erupts, yet everyone is in agreement that there is only one way to truly determine the outcome: an arm wrestle. But how far back does this custom truly go? Did the ancient Egyptians resolve disputes over strength by locking their arms in the renowned pose? What about the Romans or the ancient Greeks? When did arm wrestling truly become the measure of someone's strength, amongst youngsters at least? In 1902, an English archaeologist named John Garstang was excavating in a section of Beni Hassan, an ancient cemetery located in Egypt. He was accompanied by a team of Egyptian workers who knew the area well, but none could foresee what was about to be unearthed. The spades fell silent. The tomb of Bakhet III lay directly beneath them. The grave was home to a wall of hieroglyphics, displaying men facing one another with two hands joined and elbows bent. The first recorded proof of arm wrestling? Perhaps not. Hieroglyphs close by reveal it to be a type of grip connected to a standing fight, yet it does reveal humans' strange disposition for forming the hallowed hold. Others point to Greece or Rome being the birthplace of arm wrestling. But, in spite of ceramic fragments showing promising holds, there's no conclusive proof. And yet, there is one country which has seen centuries of activity in this department. In Japan, the word udazumo means fighting with the hands. This drawing dates back to 1793. In March 1928, Tetsu Yamamoto created the first Japanese arm wrestling association, nicknamed the Yokohama Hand. Over in the West, the first known arm wrestling tournament was held in Montreal in 1905. Throughout this period, Arthur Bandurand, Théophile Massey and Hector Decarie established themselves as the frontrunners of the sport. These men were evidently closely connected with bodybuilders. However, this trend of muscle men entering the sport was frowned upon by orthodox Japanese, as they deemed bodybuilding as a sport of the Americans. The Western evolvement of arm wrestling was based on strength and brawn, whilst in the East, careful technique was prioritized. As the 1950s approached, a young journalist named Bill Soberanes organized the first officially sanctioned American arm wrestling matches in Gallardi's saloon located in Petaluma, California. 10 years later, Soberanes would partner with Dave DeVoto, a sporting entrepreneur, to create the World Wrist Wrestling Championship in 1962. By 1969, the World Wrist Wrestling Championships appeared annually on the TV program ABC's Wide World of Sports and would do so for 16 years.
Benedict's has the advantage. Down he comes. Benedict's wins it. A little bit of an advantage. Now for more.
Spearing on the brink of the feet, comes back, and now he's down again. Cosini has done it.
By 1975, the sport was really expanding and was becoming somewhat commercialized. The NFL even launched their own arm wrestling championship in which actual players competed.
So it's the blinding speed of Ed White against the hard rock staying power of Julius Adams, the winner to be the arm wrestling champion of the National Football League. Ed White, the winner and arm wrestling champion of the National Football League.
The World Pro Arm Wrestling Championships began to be organised throughout the 1980s, with notable legends arising. Figures ranging from Alan Fisher and Johnny Walker to Cleve Dean legitimately became household names in North America and throughout most of the world. Strongmen such as John Powell Sigmason were now partaking in the activity, and similar to the Rocky film's beneficial impact upon the popularity of boxing, the release of Sylvester Stallone's Over the Top movie in 1987 drove up the support for arm wrestling. This greatly contributed to the growing audience. The 80s and 90s saw John Brezen, an American whose grandfather immigrated from Poland to the US, establish himself at the summit of the sport, notably winning the Golden Bear Pro Tournament in Moscow in 1990, the Yukon Jack National in 1995, and the WAF World Arm Wrestling Championship in 1999. Between 1982 and 2015, John only lost a single super match and only a small handful of people had beaten him in the tournaments. His longevity was remarkable as he won 11 consecutive titles at the Arnold Classic Arm Wrestling Challenge between 1997 and 2007. December 1997 saw shockwaves reverberate around the arm wrestling world as Alan Karayev, a huge Russian, beat Eric Wolfell to achieve a gold medal in the WAF World Championships. He was the first puller from outside North America to hold the #1 left-hand ranking. The Eastern European floodgates were beginning to open. Making his debut in 1997, another titan of the sport emerged. Travis Bagent, a left-handed arm wrestler, picked up 9 national titles and 5 AAAs from 1999 to 2003. There's a broad consensus that he wasn't the most skilled, yet his peak physical fitness and constant weightlifting regime garnered serious results in the early 2000s. By March 2006, the American cemented his status at the apex of the left arm wrestling pyramid until 4.5 years later. But none of the old guard were truly aware of the incoming boogeyman. Standing at 6'6" and weighing around 115 kilograms, Canada's Devon Larratt was the new kid on the block and a force to be reckoned with. A former Canadian Special Operations Forces Master Corporal, he served and was wounded in Afghanistan throughout the early 2000s. A real-life warrior. He would become the first man to beat John Brezen in a super match for 25 years in September 2008, beating him 6-0. He was now the top-ranked right-arm wrestler, but he wasn't done. On the 13th of December 2010, Devon Larratt would beat Travis Bagent in a super match in Las Vegas. He was now the #1 ranked for both arms. Larratt would retain the top right arm ranking for 5 years, but would eventually lose it after a year of inactivity due to undergoing 2 elbow surgeries. In June 2013, it was assumed by Denis Siplenkov, a Russian bodybuilder and strongman. Sporting 24-inch biceps and massive hands, he was built for arm wrestling and had reigned as champion of the absolute class of the A1 Russian Open World Arm Wrestling Grand Prix between 2008 and 2014. His reign would be brought to an abrupt end in July 2014 when a Ukrainian named Andrei Pushkar would defeat him 3-0 in the finals of the A1 Russian Open. Pushkar would hold down the #1 right arm ranking until a tragic day in November 2018.
Andrei Pushkar dies at the 14th of November at the age of 33 in a car accident when he was about to compete at the Vendetta event at the Slotty Tour.
The best left arm wrestler at the time, Oleg Zok, also found himself in the car crash. Although surviving, he sustained major physical and mental injuries, losing both his dear friend and father in the crash. With the right arm crown up for grabs, Georgia's Levan Saginashvili filled the void, winning the super heavyweight class at the WAF World Championships before swiftly dispatching Dmitry Trubin in a super match at Arm Fight 50. America's Cody Merritt assumed the left arm title in Zok's absence. The arrival of COVID and the subsequent travel restrictions and lockdowns stunted the growth of the sport, and with it, the competition between the best from all corners of the globe. But a new format would emerge in June 2021. East versus West. Staged in Istanbul, Turkey, the first competition proved a complete success, with wins coming for Artem Makarov and Hermes Gasparini in super matches. East vs West 2 in February 2022 would see Oleg Zok return to winning ways, alongside an aged but determined John Brezen. East vs West 3 saw Brezen continue his winning streak, whilst Artyom Morozov cemented his status as a rising star in the sport, backing this up with a convincing win with his left arm against Cody Merritt at East v West 4. The 5th series signalled a winning return for Devon Larratt, but he would be stifled by Gennady Kvikvinia in East v West 7. The 8th edition saw Morozov notably overturned by Georgy Tsvetkov, while Larratt reaffirmed his godlike status in a dominant win over Gasparini in the 9th competition. East vs West 10 saw the dream matchup between Larratt and Siplenkov, with the Canadian coming out on top. And in EW11, Oleg Petrenko was the standout performer, beating Barboza. When making this video, the talk of the arm wrestling world is the impending matchup between Levan Saginashvili and Devon Larratt at East vs West 12 in roughly 2 months' time. The bout is particularly exciting since Levan beat Larratt in a 6-round super match at King of the Table in June 2022. Yet the Canadian now has a trick up his sleeve.
I'm now getting the last of my procedures done, where we have blood cells from Georgia. I'm going to inject it today, and then training camp starts.
But why exactly Georgian blood? Well, firstly, the transfusion is definitely an attempt to get into Levan's head. But there's certainly a correlation between being Georgian and winning arm wrestling matches. It's undeniable that the country of just 4 million people excels in power sports, spanning from weightlifting and wrestling to rugby and judo. The high-protein diet, consisting largely of khinkali, walnuts and matsvadi, likely contributes to the nation's unique strength. Now, I have found one study which corroborates the notion that blood transfusions can have a positive effect upon athletic performance, but there are also inherent risks to the procedure. Notably, Russia's most famous bodybuilder, Vladimir Turchinsky, actually died from a heart attack soon after undergoing a blood transfusion procedure in December 2009. The treatment is largely unproven and not entirely safe. Now, I want to briefly run through what I see as the major positives and negatives associated with the sport of arm wrestling. The label mutant is consistently thrown around the arm wrestling world, with Oleg Zok being routinely called the Ukrainian mutant. But the sport does genuinely provide an opportunity for those born with abnormalities to compete and often excel. Matthias Schlitt is a German arm wrestler who was born with a genetic bone disorder that made his right arm naturally larger than his left. Arm wrestling has provided an outlet for him to excel at the 70 kg weight class. Meanwhile, America's Jeff Dabe is another example. Despite being born with oversized limbs, he used arm wrestling to build a fan base and gain widespread respect. When trained professionals take to the table, the risk of injury is largely mitigated. These individuals are trained, know the proper techniques, and usually have a good idea when to give up on a round and bow out. If they find themselves in a potential arm-breaking position, they know to fold. Well, the dangers of strong yet untrained men taking to the table was all too apparent in the 1995 World's Strongest Man competition. Despite the allure of spectating 2 massive men battling it out for points, the lack of proper training would be costly. When Magnus Samuelsson took on the Australian giant Nathan Jones, there would be an unfortunate outcome.
This is so intense from both men. Magnus turning that wrist over again. Oh my goodness! There aren't many people around here that will ever forget the pain that came across Nathan's face at the end of that contest, and Phil Martin there. He'll take no further part in this event, and who can blame him?
Overall, arm wrestling is both an entertaining and skill-based endeavour. There are obvious dangers associated with it, yet I'd say the pros outweigh the cons. What perhaps makes it so exciting is that muscle and mass don't guarantee an instant win. Technique is also a vital component, which sees David beat Goliath on a regular basis.
Talking about Ian Carnegie, the Grippler.
I feel like you. Oh yeah.